Good evening.
Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavati Tamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Peace, peace, peace.
Hey, I feel we're going to have a up on the top of the mountain experience.
Yes.
Up the mountain experience tonight. What do we got, Swami?
We're in the middle of the chapter called The Sacred Word Om by Swami Abhedananda, one of the 16 direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, who lectured in the East Coast, mostly in New York and New England, for over 20 years at the turn of the previous century. And I think we are on page 404.
Well, I'd like to think about that just for a moment. New York, about 1895 or 85 or something, joined these 5 boroughs, which Staten Island is the biggest, but the most unpopulated. Brooklyn is another. Each of them in a different county. Brooklyn's in Kings County, and Queens is in Queens County. Manhattan, the Bronx, Staten Island, and Brooklyn, sort of like Chicago, if I may say so, was a somewhat underrated, by modern standards even, intellectual center. And so I have a feeling, since Swamiji spoke there, that perhaps Abhedananda did too. Maybe in Manhattan he spoke before thousands. Isn't that your understanding? For 20 years, off and on, 20 years. Well, let's go for it. I'm excited about this. One more time, what is the subject of the chapter?
The sacred word Om.
All right.
So, the sound Om is perfectly formed for the expression or representation of the cosmic mind, because it covers all sounds and all words. All words and sounds have in their background the thoughts or the ideas. Again, all thoughts or ideas are included in the universal basic sound Om. So, if you try to substitute any other word in its place of the sound of Om, you cannot do it satisfactorily, and you will have to take these basic sounds. So if you take them and put them together, you will have to have the sound or word Om.
So just to reinforce a little bit from last time, we understand everything should be testable in our own experience. We may not have had all of the experiences we may be entitled to or becoming our way, but we have to test what we can by our own experience. So if we remember this idea, why should Om be given all this credit? Well, it is the spectrum of sound. And I think it's very interesting to introspectively or subjectively think about where the sound is coming from. Because otherwise you can't even begin to understand Sanskrit. They have 3 letters for S and 2 letters for D or however many, because sometimes it's and you see different places. The tongue is the soft palate. But look how Om, A-U-M sound, starts back here. Ah, you see? And then goes across the tongue. Ooh, and ends. So in every meaningful sense, this is the alphabet, the alpha and omega. This is the spectrum of sound, from which all the ideas that we have been able to express in thought, through words, have come, and thus books are so holy that the Indian folks don't like to put books on the ground. All right.
You gonna read?
No, I want you to.
Yeah, what did I do with them? Oh, yeah, okay. In the 28th aphorism of the first chapter of Raja Yoga, it is said that if you think of the meaning of this word Om, you think of the cosmic mind, and you also understand the whole universe. That is one of the subjects for meditation. When you are going to think of the words that are included in this sound Om, you will have to take the three sounds as symbolic of the different stages of the universe. Take the three states, the waking, the dream, and the deep sleep. Then take the gross, subtle, and unmanifested states, and you will see that these are all expressions of the words, and everything that exists in this stage is everything that exists in this stage is but the expression of that one idea. Then take the sum total and take the ideas and impressions that exist on the psychic plane, and take all that is the sum total of that which exists on the higher plane, or the states of the unmanifested energy of the unmanifested universe. Then you take the deep sleep, and you will find that all these things must be included in the meaning of these three sounds, the gross, the subtle, and the unmanifested. There are also different names given in Sanskrit for these three states. The unmanifested state is called the causal state.
Well, now, I just think this is such a wonderful chapter. We've spent some time now, haven't we, some weeks with Swami Abhedananda, and to kind of simplify for our minds, the Western mind. I think he did a pretty good job. Do you? In describing the three states of consciousness that people in the West in general are aware of. And again, as we like to say, their own direct experience. The waking state, right? The dreaming state, and the state of dreamless sleep. Three states of consciousness. So now we discovered, as we worked through this chapter, really this whole concept, that he's climbing this mountain that we're speaking of, and near the end comes up with, lo and behold, the premise or the offering of the, from the Western point of view, possibility of a fourth state of consciousness, superconsciousness, which is both the substratum, the ground of being, and also the height of surrounding consciousness, as the Bible says, in which we live and move and have our being. A fourth state of consciousness, which leads us from the relative plane, that is to say, the universe as we wake up in the morning and see what part of it we see, the waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep stage, to an absolute consciousness. It leads us up to the top of the mountaintop, the hallelujah, where the Western mystics speaking the same language all over the world and coming from the same country, in the West, they speak of their union with God as what they're seeking and finding. So now this fourth state of consciousness is what we're speaking about when he goes back to the roots of Om. And I found out something. I wanted to go back and look it up, Swami. I hope you'll permit, because we were getting in this highest level of thinking subsumed under the word or involved in the word Om here at this particular time in our reading of Abhedananda. So if you remember last week as we came out of it, and I'm a little bit of it, he says that at a certain time before the evolution of the universe, according to one metaphorical or mythological view in India, and the classical view. And he said, when it's all inborn, don't you see, the cosmos, at that time, we read last time at the end of our reading, all the particles of matter were in a state of perfect equilibrium. Then it began to vibrate and produce a sound like humming. The whole universe is producing that sound. Science is agreeing now. Humming, the very same word. And we cannot hear it because our ears are too gross. But if your ears are tuned to hear the music of the spheres, I love this, man. He bars out phrases. You will hear the sound, which is produced by the motions of all the different objects of the universe and the vibration of the molecules and all the things of the universe. The yogis hear that causal sound. It is like the sound of a bell or like an unconnected sound. And then he says magnificently, he comes up with these every so often, these real wing-dingers. The whole universe in this way is singing the praise of the Almighty. Now just give me a little bit of elbow room here. We may go back into this again sometime because we're on to something. Now, for those of us that like to simplify this whole thing and talk about the evolution and involution of the universe in one great sphere, kind of like the Indianapolis 500 car race, you know, Memorial Day, rouse the bend, heads for home. How about this from January 12, 2005? Quote, the early universe rang with the sound of countless cosmic bells. This is science talking. And why I get such a tingle myself when I remember that Swami Abhedananda, who was the assistant minister here and who has been in this very room, and the eldest Swami, or virtually the eldest Swami, one of the eldest disciples of Holy Mother, preaching from Oregon. And he it was who said in the presence of one of our scientifically oriented brahmacharis, Vedanta, he said, the scientists are our friends. Remember? The theologians are not our friends. The scientists are our friends. So this is from the Scientific American by Corey S. Powell. And the date is 2019, February 6th. In the beginning, space rang like a bell. Ooh, 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 look who the poets are these days. Look who the people that are speaking beauty and unity. And yes, the insights of Vedanta. The mystics. Following the Big Bang, sound waves produced by the intermingling of light and matter. In the beginning, space rang like a bell. And he goes on to say, it was the aftermath of the Big Bang. And the universe was filled with a torrid plasma, an energy soup of particles and radiation. What it is electrons, just the hydrogen ion, just hydrogen, H minus. We call it an electron, buzzing around. And the protons with a charge plus, buzzing around. And it's a plasma because these atoms, but only part of an atom, you see, it's not balanced like H2O is just plus and minus and it comes out neutral and everything's fine. But they're not capable at that early time of permitting light to travel. It's opaque, but sound is humming. And the reason they say this is, I think it's just delightful, there were slight density and pressure gradients that pushed material around, says Lloyd King, a cosmologist at UC Davis. So the sound waves, don't you see, are produced by their intermingling of light and matter as the thing becomes less opaque, but still radiation. It's a very interesting post-embryonic form of the universe. Push material around, says Lloyd King, and when stuff gets pushed around, there are sound waves out of UC Davis. The ringing happened everywhere, so intensely that we can still sense it 13.8 billion years later. It has been detected in the cosmic wave background, the afterglow left over from the Big Bang's fading glow. Now this is okay, but it's not that out of reach, because as John Dobson was the first one to point out in my young life, that squiggly stuff that you see on the back of the screen of the TV, sometimes they go, that's the cosmic background radiation. And it was discovered fairly recently by Bell Telephone Laboratory, this and that and the other. Now, I hope the Swami has got his fingers crossed and holding his breath, but can he imagine that in my simple-minded way, I might be looking forward immensely to the probes, particularly the James Webb Telescope, which is coming online. You'll be telling us when it's coming online. It's delayed, and the coronavirus delayed it. It might be already 2012 until it hits the skies 1 million miles out in space, with the specific design to go back as far out as we can, and as we understood from last time, and back in time. So we will be seeing early formations. You could call them primal quasars, which we're already aware of, and get back as close as we can to what the people of the evolution concept to describe the universe will call the beginning of this oscillation. Now, there is a theory that though we have the possibility of getting back 13.8 billion years in length, that maybe the universe is around for 15 billion years. All of this soup stuff and radiation stuff and darkness stuff and sound. And in another earlier article of the LA Times, which I have on file, and we'll try to get it back again, they actually, with some humor, but not altogether, because it wasn't just a kind of a cavalier, kind of satirical ending. They said perhaps it's like, and I think maybe they mentioned the Beatles, the modern people, singers' idea of Om. Isn't that fun? Swami, I want you to keep going because you do it so well.
Talk about the soup getting cold. Goodness.
13.8 billion years and it's still kind of bubbling away.
It may be the same being, who experienced certain ideas in the dream state, but still there is a difference in the perception and experience, and this difference can be explained very clearly if we give the different names. We call the being which is conscious of the objects that exist on this plane of consciousness. It doesn't seem. We call the being which is conscious of the objects that exist on this plane of consciousness. A, the same being when dreaming is called B. I don't think that period's supposed to be there. Yeah, we're going to call the first being A, and there's no period there. The same being when dreaming is called B, and when it is sleeping soundly without having any other kind of experience, it could be called C. So in trying to differentiate them, we give the different names. A may be one who is conscious of the objects which exist on this plane of consciousness. B is another name for the being who would exist in the dream state. And C is the other name for the being who is sleeping soundly without having any other kind of experience.
Okay, let me give you a little further there. Now the sum total, of all the experience, and we're supposed to evaluate this, right? Introspectively ourselves, each one of it. Now the sum total of all the experiences of all living creatures in the waking state may be called A. All the creatures in the waking state. In the dream state, we call it B. That's what the state is. California. I call the South, I do, a state of mind. Lovingly, I call it that. We call it B. And the sum total of the experiences of the causal state, this is where it gets a little murky, like the early universe, because the causal state is dreamless sleep. But still, they feel that it is full of consciousness. Now, since we don't experience it, if you want to, I should think metaphorically, you can call it consciousness asleep. But consciousness, powerful, and foundationally a being, not an idea. That's why I say that Vedanta is closer to realism than it is idealism, actually. But both of them wink out like fireflies at night when the higher realm of superconsciousness is achieved, we're told, which is light and love and unity, Satchitananda, existence, knowledge, bliss. And because of my good companion on the path of life who's thinking in these philosophical terms now, we were talking about that the other day, he said, well, what about peace? Can't we put that in there too? Absolutely. The joy which is peace. And one of our friends, one of our devotees, Patrick, is up in Northern California on a farm tonight. He's joined us in the wide circle of global communications that we're striving to. Do you realize that in millions of years, this very evening that we're spending might be picked up on some planet in some other galaxy, some other part of the solar system? Anyway, Patrick's out there. And if this opportunity for inwardness, hard work in the daytime, and then the serenity of the evening, opportunity to reflect and think of God in that way, in a meditative way, he says he's feeling, as many of our devotees are reporting, that having the stay-home policy, they're feeling wonderful in the environment of God. And he's saying that when he finds this particular moment, he says, peace, joy, freedom. So yeah, God is love, God is light, God is truth, God is peace. God, as Myron says, is laughter. So we've got this whole causal state here, a kind of a vibrant being of consciousness, but we go right through it like sleeping on a subway and wake up in the morning and say, what a wonderful sleep I had. And the Indian folks who don't stop at nothing, they call that, like overcoats, you know, and the inner overcoat, they call it like the blissful sheaths. 3 states, waking, dreaming, dreamless sleep. Why? Because, is this too far? We surely have enough poetry in our souls to imagine this as, again, a metaphor. As if we were sleeping at the feet of God. We're so close to Brahman, though asleep, in this state of some kind of deep awareness, that we're almost as if we were at the feet of the Shining One. Or as I love to say, the one shining infinity. He shines. All these shine. Okay, buddy. Did I finish the paragraph yet? Oh, no, I didn't even get that far. Okay, so we got this cosmic thing going on here. And the sum total of experiences of the causal state, or dreamless sleep, may be called C. These are the principal sounds. Wow, he's off with it. Now he got his lyre, or whatever you call it, his lute under his head. And he's having a great time with that. Having understood the different stages that are included in that one sound, Om, if we think of the meaning of the sound, Om, when meditating, then we gradually go from the gross to the subtle, and from that to the causal state, and from that to the realm which is beyond all relativity. This guy is a symphony, isn't he? Poetic.
Do you have your...
No, I don't have a pen.
He's got medicating instead of meditating here.
Yeah, medicating. Well, don't you remember that? You shouldn't have done it, Swami, but you do these things to me, and I'm sorry, he's going to get as good as he gets. I was in the dental chair once when my dentist, who was a friend, had me at his mercy. You know how they do about. And he said, did you hear about, who would it be, the Maharishi, who went to the dentist? And the dentist, he's going to have a filling or something, maybe even a tooth pull, I don't know. The dentist was fiddling around with a syringe and stuff, and he says, what are you doing? And the doctor says, well, this is a little Novocaine. It'll dull the pain. And Maharishi waves. He says, no, he says, it's just Novocaine. It's standard procedure. It'll take away the pain. He says, no, 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 I don't want it. He says, well, why don't you want it? He said, I'm trying to transcend dental medication.
So anyway, it says when medicating, we go gradually from the gross to the subtle, and from there to the causal state. There you go. All right. So the object of yoga is to reach to the absolute and to understand that beyond which no mind we know that the gross is the manifestation of the subtle, and the subtle is the manifestation of the causal. Now, what do we mean by the subtle state? Everything that goes through the evolution takes different forms and becomes the objects of the senses. If we have the finer perception, we may, going into a room, smell an odor that will not be noticed by another. So, with our hearing, the Western ears would notice many of the finer notes in music, which the Eastern ears are tuned to them. I have a feeling he meant would not notice. Anyway, those who are colorblind do not distinguish between shades of the color. In fact, all of us are more or less colorblind. What we can see is very limited, and beyond a certain vibration, we do not realize the things. Professor Huxley said that when a rosebud blooms, it produces a sound like a gun shell. If we had ears to hear, we could hear the sound, and if we realize our inability to do so, we find that our perception is in a limited scale. But these finer perceptions must be included, though our senses are most imperfect. Some of the Western minds depend much upon the senses and cannot find the real thing. Footnote, the Swami here meant to say about the direct realists of the West. But the Indian mind go beyond the senses and realize the essence of the thing. Most of the scientists try to find the existence of soul, try to perceive the soul, and to catch it with instruments, but they do not get it, and as they do not get it, they deny its existence. The pity is this, that they do not think that their senses delude them almost every moment about the soul. The soul is described as a very subtle object because it is not perceived by the senses. There are the subtle things and the subtle forces which are not seen, but the gross manifestations, which are but the expressions of those subtle things and forces, are easily cognizable. Again, the finer objects and the subtle particles of the matter and the force are the expressions of the causal state of the universe, which cannot be cognized in any way by the senses. This universe existed in the beginning of the evolution in the unmanifested causal state and has been projected on this plane of consciousness in the manifested form, and that is the reason why we perceive with our senses. In fact, the world exists in relation to us and to our senses. If we shut our senses, the whole world will disappear. If we close our eyes and stop our ears, nose, and sense of touch, the universe is gone beyond our relation. So, of these three states, we must remember that the gross is the expression of the subtle, and the subtle is the expression of the causal. And beyond these three states shines the Atman.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Yeah. We're getting high now, right? Yeah. This could end up to be a kind of a revival meeting. Rejoice and be glad, for the Son of His love, for Jesus our Savior, who is now gone above. Hallelujah, glory land. Hallelujah, amen. Hallelujah, glory land, revive us again. So we're talking poetry. But is it sheer poetry? I think there's too much consonance here, too much resonance to disregard it. The scientists deal basically with the objective world as they think. And the poets deal with the inner world, or the spiritual folks. Now let's just see what kinds of analogy we have here and what they're talking, and the words they use, okay? About this sound thing. The mystics of India, say of the Ramakrishna order of India, which we resonate with, vibe with, they will say that the sound can be heard in meditation. Think of it. Now, these are men that don't go around, walking the dog, whether it's with a yo-yo or just for the daily thing that after. No, they're not out for a stroll. This is a rather coveted, lovely experience that some of them have. And how do they describe this sound of Brahman that they hear? I've heard in two different ways. One is humming, a humming sound. I think Abhedananda calls it that. And the other is Om. Now, there is an interesting thing. See, it's inner. That means it's unreal? I doubt it. Because we're finding that the more deeply we go within, the closer we get to the causal beginnings of everything, including the Empire State Building, including a building. Blueprint comes first. Blueprint comes from the mind, not invisible. So let's just take one other one and have a little fun with that. And that is the inner light of which the mystics speak. Now, we had John Dobson sitting here some years ago, our astronomer philosopher, wonderful man. He has interpreted this for us so that most of us Westerners that have come in his orbit or ambit or whatever you want to call it, just love the way, and this young man here really has been able to remind me and to reveal and to simple. It's just a great way for us to approach this whole thing of there being behind the universe, within the universe, deep within and at the highest level of our thought and consciousness, something which is so grand that it is everything. Beyond the universe, within it, beyond space and time is the way John's book came out in its second edition title. I thought I suggested it because it was kind of academic to me before. So what we're hearing here is, and so somebody asked the question about light, and light with a capital L, the inner experience. It was Kaya from Finland, and John didn't happen to wake up to it that night. They say here they don't get it. The scientists don't get it because they've never had these experiences. But some of them getting closer every day, and I believe some of them have. Erwin Schrödinger is considered a Vedantist, for example. So, the inner light. I just so happen to have asked our assistant Swami Satchimayananda today, after reading at breakfast. I believe. And I said, Swami, is there any indication, any record within the vast world of wisdom and understanding of experience of Vedanta, Ramakrishna order, Swamis, and the ancient compendium of wisdom in the reports, records of Indian thinking, of a blind person being illumined? He said, yes. And I said, blind from birth, even? And he said, yes. And he gave me the name, which I have to hear again, somebody asked, well-known seer. And we sort of have background echoes of that in our wisdom. Some people think Homer was blind. And it sort of gives to him an extra panache, a little bit of a thing there, that of course he was a wise man, the blind man. Because for one thing, what he and she have the ability to do is to think. and certainly to explore, I should think, their inner landscape their whole life long with a more acute perception, perhaps. You know, the eagle can see 8 times what we can see from up in space. So those that happen to be blessed enough to follow the path of wisdom, hey, why would they not see a landscape of symbolism and joy and just light? Now here's one for you. I'm trying to be hard-headed, believe it or not, tonight. You know the story of Helen Keller? I want my brother from Brazil to know about Helen. Helen Keller was born in a fix. This little girl was born blind, deaf or deaf, as we used to say in the South.
No, she wasn't born. She had an illness.
Oh, truly? Good for you. Did she remember any of the light that she saw?
I don't know about the light.
Yeah.
That was the one thing they were able to get through about the water, the word wah-wah.
Really?
Yeah,
How exciting. Well, she was not born, but that's a very important concept. But anyway, she was deaf, dumb, and blind. No, still dumb. I mean, you know. Deaf, dumb, and blind. Now, you try to think of it. Deaf, okay, that's a kind of a distinction. And blind, would you rather be blind or deaf? Think about the and ways that we've compensated. And dumb, we don't think about that too often, but she was all three. Wouldn't you think she'd be sealed off? Really, a lifetime of darkness. To sit in solemn silence in the dull, dark, you know, whatever, you know, in a cell without light, sound, or the ability to speak even. And because of a dedicated saint, talk about nurses being angels and so forth, and doctors, who really gave her life to the unfolding of this leaf, mostly by touch in the palm of her hand. Now, you don't have to take my word for it because you're not likely to anyway. Read it. Read the words in the books that she had transmogrified and transmitted to us that she wrote. She became a mystic, not just 3 times 3 years. You know, talking about the Westerners who called up into their analytic left hemisphere, which is it's a great strength. It's also a great weakness. They say about the actuaries, there's 2 kind of actuaries. The introverted actuary and the extroverted actuary. There's this kind of high-class CPA, accountant type, but really up there. The extroverted, the introverted actuary looks at his shoes when he's talking to you, and the extroverted actuary looks at your shoes. And also, if you ask an actuary how much does 2 and 2 make, he'll say, how much do you want it to make? So I just think that this world of the inner sphere of experience may not be poo-pooed or sniffed at by the scientists. It just ain't going to happen. And also the problem about the Big Bang is, and the sound, yeah, if I live long enough, I'm going to be sitting around the campfire very excited when the James Webb telescope goes online. Because not only are we liable to see early forms of energy, light, it's quite possible that these proto-quasars are the very bubbling of the soup, the beginning of the universe as we know it and see it. But isn't it possible, at least for a little kid that doesn't have much above the eyebrows, to wonder if we may also, through that telescope, begin to hear the sounds of the preceding state? Anyway, it sounds to me like the scientists and the spiritual people, the mystics, are walking along hand in hand as far as they both go. Yes, the blind can see, and the lame can walk, and the dumb can speak. It says so in the Bible. All right, buddy. I'm over now. Please go on. This is so cool. I left my glasses inside anyway, so there you go. Thank you.
Now, in trying to think of the meaning of the word Om, The yogis in India adopted a certain method, and by that method they merge one state into another. In pronouncing the word Om, when they make the first two sounds or words, ah and u, which are gross and subtle, they try to dissolve the gross into the subtle and then the subtle into the causal. When the first, the gross, is merged into the second, the subtle, think of what they are going to do and what they ought to do, and the case stands for a certain abstract thought and idea. This word Om is a symbolic word, meaning the gross is merged into the subtle, and that is again merged into the causal, and that which is beyond these three is the truth, or the reality of the universe. Now, when you have closed your lips, it is no longer but something higher, and that is the fourth part, which is the absolute. It has been before that after the gross and the subtle, the causal is merged into the absolute, and so there remains no longer the causal, the subtle, and the gross, but each one is reduced to that absolute ocean of the divine intelligence and bliss. The nature or the cosmic mind contains the seed of all the different forms, types, ideas, words, names, and forms, and the absolute is the so-called cause and ground of the cosmic mind. The absolute does not change its nature. It is not transformed from one state into another, and it is not affected by any other things. Supposing that you have a canvas, and upon that canvas you paint something and brush it off, and paint again, but the canvas quality remains the same and unchangeable. So these different things we perceive are like the painting upon the canvas of the absolute. We can go to that background or rise above all conditions if we try to enjoy the paintings, but we see every moment that we cannot do it. Try to keep it in any state all the time, but it is impossible because everything is in constant change. That which is within time, space, and causation is subject to the laws of evolution, and therefore they must change. So it is a vain hope to expect that this body will remain unchangeable. It will take its own course, otherwise there would not be development of any kind.
Well, Swami, this is just a wonderful evening. I'm really rejoicing in everything that you're reading to us and having us see. We have the impression, don't you see? And it's hard because the words, you use different words like newspaper headlines change, but you're trying to poke at the deeper underlying significance. So what I'm going to say tonight is that we feel that subjective experience is reality. Subjective experience equals reality. And reality has now become so deep and so vast and so surrounding and so complete that infinity shining has become what subjective experience equals reality equals consciousness. Consciousness, which was thought to be so immaterial to the West, particularly. No, the real world's out there. And Samuel Johnson, he was a character. He was a card. He was walking along one day, and somebody was asking him about the idealistic theories of Bishop Berkeley and whatever it was. The idea is that perhaps the universe is more likely to be ideas than it is matter. Without realizing that the consciousness, the ground of all the ideas which kind of flitter away like birds, when one gets close to the total oneness, which is consciousness, existence, bliss, or being with a capital B, wisdom and love and joy, bliss, that this very consciousness, not ideas, but consciousness, is reality. First we have matter, then we have E equals mc squared, and Einstein says the E is the big thing. The only thing that's capitalized in that whole equation is E. And John Dodson, has an idea that maybe Einstein got that from his wife. Yeah, it looks like that could very well. Her friend was Tesla met Vivekananda. We have a lot of good stuff going at home when we sit and play the jug and the banjo together at night. But if what I'm calling subjective experience now, because that E, seen from the inside, we now feel, is experience. But fourth state experience, the superconsciousness, is no longer anything to do with the world of matter or even ideas seen like little birds flying around on the canvas of awareness. And the awareness is not just some kind of, unapproachable, unmeaningful thing. It's consciousness, man. It's existence. It's bliss. Absolute. And then that ocean into which we jump, into which the drop falls and finds out it was the ocean all along. In that ocean is everything. Amen.
So, a yogi, understanding that there is no permanent peace and happiness in the material manifestations, tries to go beyond that state, where there is a permanent peace and happiness. Then he comes to know the real peace and happiness are possible in that state, which is unchangeable, and not anywhere else. In order to reach that unchangeable state, you will have to rise above all conditions. This plane of the phenomenal consciousness is limited and does not go far. So until we reach the higher state, we cannot understand the absolute truth. Absolute truth cannot be brought down to this material plane, and if it could be possible, it would take the name of the conditional, and the moment it becomes conditional, it is subject to all the laws of the phenomenal world, and is also subject to changes. So peace or happiness that arises from the changeable conditions is but temporary and ephemeral. We crave for the continuance of all kinds of happiness, but that craving is seldom satisfied. The time is coming when we will have to leave this plane and go to some other condition. The yogi, understanding this truth, does not waste his energy by following the phantoms of hope, but makes the best use of his time and energy by trying to go beyond the conditions and, consequently, gain that happiness which is everlasting. The everlasting supreme state exists in the abode of that being which is called the absolute being of the universe. It is the abode of the transcendental knowledge and bliss. In that supreme state, there is no pain, no sorrow, no suffering, no disease or death, and all other states below is subject to all, and all other states below are subject to all kinds of pain and misery.
Okay. Well, my brother, we're getting really into something where it's pretty wonderful because we're seeing nothing less than the blending of two oceans, the oceans of science, which took half of the Greek worlds of understanding, and then worked on that into our Western civilization, and the ocean of Eastern spirituality, which is a kind of like everyday experience. I mean, I was riding on a train once, Swami, in India, and you were rattling around there, or it had just been maybe just recently left, and I saw a man in the field, and as I recall, he was wearing a white turban and a white loincloth, and he was pushing a plow. And I don't know, I have a feeling that's what it was, maybe an ox with a plow. Are you ready for this? Some of you know me, I'm a populist anyway. I think Father Abraham, Brother Abe Lincoln, had it about right. Of the people, by the people, and for the people. But the enhanced people, my goodness, they glow in the dark. I have a feeling that man following the plow, and it would kill us. He was out in the noonday sun. And he was pretty sunburned, too. He knew more, as I like to say, they said about Vivekananda when he was trying to get his credentials for the Parliament of Religions. Remember 1893 in Chicago? It didn't happen. He was over in Boston by this time. And a Greek professor named Wright saw who he was and got to know him and said, asking this man for his credentials is like asking the sun for its credentials to shine. And then a phrase that just brings peace to my heart and a smile to my face every time. He said, he is more learned, meaning wise, than all our Harvard professors put together. That man, representing India, has a deeper inclination from chromosomes of hundreds of years away under BCE, knowing that Atman and Brahman are one. So I'd like to just try to help us to understand that this is not casual. This meeting of the oceans, of the science of the West and the spirituality of the East, if we want to put it oversimplified. Lots of spiritual people in the West, but you got thousands, in the history of India, everybody has a hint. Then nobody, except maybe a few that have been seeing too many Coca-Cola ads and stuff like that these days. Nobody in India doesn't know, because that's what they discovered way under BC. But look at it this way. We've got art, the whole world of art. And there's a fellow that's got a statue right down there at the Dorothy Chandra Pavilion, a great big bronze statue, whatever it is. And it's considered the major work of art, this level of art of the 20th century. I have been to one of our great places and sanctuaries in the United States, this place called New Harmony, Indiana. We'll talk about it sometime. And there's a statue by this same man. Incidentally, our beloved Paul Tillich decided to be buried there, New Harmony. Great center of consciousness. And in this statue, he has three things, they're non-objective. They're not looking, but kind of like hands and arms going like this. Three energies, three states of being. But they're not quite in sync. They're not quite in balance. And the Indians have the idea that in the time of Avakya, when the universe is withdrawn in the heart of Brahman, that all of those energies are balanced. There's an equilibrium. And then when they get slightly unbalanced, out comes the cosmos. Just what we're reading the scientists saying. So if you can just hang with me for a second, I have one thing, if I can just try to give it to you. I may have to come back to it. But what I want you to understand is that this business of the great sphere of spirituality in which we exist, we think of ourselves as existing, is not unknown to the powers of the West. Philosophical, poetic, sculpture, music. And I'd like us to remember that when Socrates left the banquet early, and the boys came along maybe 1 o'clock in the night, maybe 2, say 1:30, with their arms over his shoulders, having had a great time, singing, whatever. They found Socrates standing, stock still in the road, in a state of illumination. I thank you.
You have one more paragraph.
I figured you did. You were working very high up the top of the mountain.
Well, and that gentleman you saw from the train was certainly outstanding in his field.
Yes, he was a farmer
Yes.
who was outstanding in his field.
If we keep this ideal in our mind and repeat the word Om and understand the different sounds that are included in the universal sound or word Om, then we realize that the gross will merge into the subtle, and the subtle into the causal, and the causal again into that transcending absolute. Then we realize something which cannot be realized by any other method. A yogi who has accomplished this realization is happy, peaceful, and restful, and is above all the conditions of suffering, disease, and death. Having realized that state, which is described as the state of the eternal bliss or perfection, a yogi becomes one with the source of Om and becomes Om. Then he becomes the cosmic mind. Nay, he becomes the cosmic mind. Nay, he becomes one with the Absolute, and when that is accomplished, the purpose of human life is served, and the ultimate goal is reached. So,
That's an amen chorus. Are we close to time, Swami? Okay, I want to give just a little PS to leave on a very light note, like peanuts for the elephant, okay? But I want you to realize that this is not the province of a whole nother hemisphere, the eastern hemisphere of the world. This is our birthright, like a rich uncle. I say we got a dad upstairs, a rich daddy, rich father. Wealthy father. William Blake, marvelous English poet. 1 foot in metaphysical realm, 1 foot on earth, quite different. And he and his wife were something else. They were a little bit like Adam and Eve. She was a mystic too. And they would kind of, use their time well, get high. Now I want you to think about this for just a second for fun. So you got Adam. And then Adam had some problems because his mind grew so big. Eve's mind grew so big, they decided they were separate from God and had to walk out of the paradise of feeling just in the hand of God, the laws of nature, whatever. So here comes Jesus. Now, I think that we can have a discussion between all the rivers of faith of the world. As a matter of fact, for years at Easter time, I was looking at Jesus from the perspective of the Muslims, from the perspective of his contemporaries. Harry Emerson Postic did that before me better than anyone. And Jesus is called the second Adam by those that look at it. He's a superluminary. Hey, you know what I got a problem with that? Leave the theology to those that love it. Lighting candles, whatever they want, altar of their minds. But is he not a superluminary? So in Jesus, the second Adam, you can say you can see the perfect man. So I'm saying for tonight, just for tonight, can we just set aside Son of God or God himself? And think of this. It hasn't been emphasized too much lately, as much as I think he's a perfect man. Isn't that enough for starts? Archbishop of Canterbury some years ago said, I think we're going to have to start studying the Holy Spirit. Got the Father and the Son. I think we'll have to start. That's what we're about these days, my friends. So if there's any poetry in your soul, don't be skittish. Don't hide it under a bushel lamp, a bushel basket, your light. And if you have any inclination to go within and be reflective, even 15 minutes a day, in silence, in receptivity, in yearning, in awareness. Nourish it. It's the new water that ye shall drink and never be thirsty, the living water of the soul. So one day, somebody comes to William Blake's house and knocks on the door. Hey, Englishman, just a common, ordinary dude. And Mrs. Blake answers the door and welcomes them in, and by way of explanation, or by way of whatever it is, courtesy, says, Mr. Blake is not with us today. Amen and amen and hallelujah. Thank you, Swami.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Peace, peace, peace.
Hallelujah, glory land. Hallelujah, amen. Hallelujah, glory land. Revive us again.